Welcome to the latest in Sustainable Investors series of interviews with leading asset owners. Our main subject today is the response of the finance industry, insurers, asset managers, and asset owners to climate change and nature loss. The disruption posed by these systemic threats to business models cannot be overstated. Of course, it's not the only challenge facing global financial institutions today. Nevertheless, they have been accused of moving too slowly. This matters hugely because of the signals they send to the wider economy and society. I'm delighted to be joined by Günther Thallinger, board member with responsibility for investment management and sustainability at Allianz, one of the world's largest financial institutions, spanning insurance and asset management. Welcome, Günther. Before we start, would you be so kind as to introduce yourself, your role at the firm, and any other roles that are relevant to sustainable investment?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me here. And thank you already for a very kind introduction. There is not so much to add, actually. I'm responsible for investment management, correct? That's all the, let's say, funds that the Allianz Group has to run for the insurance business. And I'm also allowed to work with colleagues on sustainability, the sustainability integration across the entire Allianz Group. And I'm also working in particular on all the health insurance business that we have. These are the main responsibilities that I'm allowed to cover, and I'm now in my 9th year at the holding board of the group.
Okay, great. And thank you for that. And I wanted to start off with a widely noted LinkedIn post that you made earlier this year, where you pointed to the slow pace of the renewables transition overall, and what it would mean for insurance, capitalism, and indeed humanity. And you asked for suggestions on scaling and accelerating the net zero transition. I wanted to start off by asking you what was the thinking behind that call and what you made of the response.
Yeah, thank you. Look, it seems that the energy markets are in a very, very big transformation already. If you look into how solar is developing and really growing into the energy electricity supply, that's enormous. Let's say in all major economies, this is what's happening, and it's not only that let's say the people build out renewable, in particular solar. No, it's also that people are very, very much into expanding grids and also creating more of resilience of the grids via let's say batteries as buffer capacity. Very much in economies we see that electrification is really happening. With this, we seem to be on a very strong path towards this energy market transformation. With this, of course, then also as a core part of economies. However, despite the speed, we seem to be still too slow in order to really achieve what we have to achieve. In the end, we need to have an economy that is net zero, whether that's 2050 or at a certain other point in time. There is no doubt we need to reach the net zero level. And that was the background. The background was, hey, people, we seem to have really, really a very strong development in many, many economies, despite many other political discussions. However, the speed is not enough. And be clear, if we are not speedily enough, if we just follow what, let's say, some of the policies indicate, then we may be simply too slow.
Indeed. And I mean, did you were you heartened by the responses to that to that post?
Well, the responses were, first of all, there was nobody who actually said, okay, this is not how it is going to look like if we reach these famous 3 degrees of warming. It was rather that, let's say, some of the experts really said, okay, 3 degrees of warming, that's much harsher than what you indicate. You only indicate what is going to happen with financial markets, and then yes, of course, to a certain degree with capitalism overall. But honestly, that's what these academics replied to me. What is going to happen with humanity with 3-degree warming is much more serious. This is responses that I got. And in that form, nobody came around the corner and said, no, it's not going to be, let's say, that brutal in terms of what you are describing. The other responses were, let's say, really very important too. Why? Because people really said, hey, look, we do have this energy transformation ongoing. People were, let's say, discussing with me what's happening in China, the 445 build out in gigawatts in terms of renewable capacity. They also mentioned examples like Pakistan, let's say the 17 gigawatts, this bottom-up solar panel implementation over the last 8 to 12 months. To give examples how energy markets are transforming and how strong these trends are. And this is, of course, very much comforting. But as I mentioned before, we really need to have a discussion how we can speed this up across various industries, economies. And that's also what, let's say, happened in terms of response type of discussions after that little post.
Okay, so there's strong growth, but not strong enough in certain pockets. But there's also in other kind of major jurisdictions, there's clearly a slowdown in government policy and corporate action, and perhaps that's a factor of competing priorities. But I'm wondering what you feel are the reasons for a slowdown in certain jurisdictions, and what the practical responses are available to asset owners.
Yeah, we need to distinguish. We need to distinguish what's really happening in the economies and what is, let's say, what is to be heard from political discussions. It's very important to once again emphasize the overall trend of transformation is not going to change by political discussions. If you look into, for instance, California, where you clearly have today's situations where more than 140% of the total electricity need is covered by solar, and obviously the additional 40% to the 100% is simply stored in batteries, and for that reason, electricity from solar is also used. Let's say when there is no sun to be seen in California, meaning in the night times. And with this, they already have started to manage the famous duck curve of electricity markets. When you see what is happening in Texas, simply because electricity from renewables is so cheap, yeah, then this indicates clearly that there is a distinction to be made between what's happening in the real economy and what's discussed on a political level. In Germany, just to take this example, we had last year the biggest build out of balcony solar, let's say, production, the biggest that we had, despite all the discussion on a political level. Politics is not going to change the overall trend. That's important for investors. It's very important for investors. Investors need to look through into the real energy, the real economy developments. That's what investors need to do. And if you look into, let's say, the reports that the International Energy Agency is producing, it's very clear that renewables are up, electrification is up, efficiency gains in energy use is up, grid and storage is up. All three, oil, gas, coal, is down in terms of investments that are going into the energy market. That's just what it is.
There's a lot of convincing evidence there, quite clearly. But when you have, the US, you have Ørsted having to pause its kind of offshore wind plant production or developments in of New York State, for example, and you have the kind of changes and announcements that have been going on at the EPA. It feels it would be a brave pundit to regard this as a kind of bump in the road.
Yeah, this is certainly a very complicated situation, I admit. We as investors had to learn over the, let's say, recent months that political risk needs to be considered very much differently than what we assumed earlier. And you also need to understand that, let's say, some of these developments that you mentioned, they are very open in terms of outcome. There are lawsuits ongoing and the like. Yes, you are very right. For investors, that's certainly making the entire environment more complicated. Absolutely. But that does not speak, let's say, against that there is an overall trend globally towards energy market transformation. The energy markets, economies, clearly have noticed that fossil is coming from three regions, which are Russia, Middle East, and let's say North America, and they want to make themselves independent of that. That is what's happening globally in energy markets.
Right. Now, I know that we're talking about investment, and your background is very much investment management. But I wanted to talk partly on insurance as well, and looking at the challenge posed to the insurance business model by climate risk and related forces, particularly the concept of insurance deserts. What are insurers doing to address the issue of rising uninsured climate losses, and how do you expect underwriting related processes and practices to evolve?
Yeah. Thank you for mentioning this. Indeed, we have as societies simply the situation that we need to adapt to the reality. There is, of course, a certain form of climate change that already happened. We need to adapt to that. There's no doubt. Insurers play a major role into supporting this adaptation by assessing risks. Let's say by let's say offering information about the development of risks, and then by answering to this with certain forms of products. Products like, for instance, parametric insurance that are offering very quickly service in the case of certain events is one form of answers, but the very operative improvement of certain risky situations is another one. This is a service that insurance companies can offer. And why can we? Because we have, of course, lots of information how certain forms of weather developments are going to influence real estate infrastructure and the like. And there is very operatively, but also insurers can provide all forms of immediate risk warnings. So is there, let's say, actually a hailstorm to come? How can people actually protect their assets, the car, or other stuff? Is there, let's say, any form of flood situation evolving, coming up? It's also something where we can really help people to protect themselves. And we can even organize how this protection actually works in a very operative form. It's not only a financial contract, the insurance contract, it's really directly into improving the situations in, let's say, the lives of individuals. So adaptation is clearly a major point that we need to work on as an insurance company. But for us, it's really adaptation plus mitigation gives resilience. Very important. We can adapt to the situation that we have today, but we need to really make sure that this situation is not worsening evermore. And that's why mitigation needs to be clearly also in our strong focus, both. And that together will give resilience.
The question of resilience is clearly an important one that the insurance sector plays an important part in. And clearly, there's a role for natural resilience as part of that of the steps that we need to take. And it's a reminder of how nature loss and climate change are very much entwined as subjects. And we can expect those to be very much entwined at COP30 in a month or so's time. So I wanted to ask, what with COP30 expected to focus on these particular themes, what would you expect the kind of key priorities of governments to be in Belem and beyond?
Yeah. Most people would clearly confirm this. Let's say these situations, these developments are very much intertwined. For this reason, there must be indeed forms of, let's say, longer term plans out there that we need to have. So clearly for Belem COP30, people are discussing the NDCs, the nationally determined contributions, a quantification exercise, as some believe. But it isn't. This is clearly an element of a much more strategic, let's say, planning that governments need to do. So what we need to understand also for Belem, it's great to bring in NDCs, it's great to raise the ambition, but actually it's only great if behind these NDCs there are clearly plans how these NDCs are going to be achieved. It's very important. This brings us back to the, let's say, to, for instance, the energy market. Governments must have their, let's say, target picture of an energy market 2030, 2035, 2040. And this then needs to be an input to the NDC. But not only that, governments also need to have their target picture for the entire transport sector and for, of course, also their information grid. Why is this? Because those three you mentioned intertwined. They are very much intertwined. Transport and electrification need to go hand in hand. Absolutely. They can only go hand in hand if governments start to provide these target pictures. And the target pictures feed, let's say, feed into the NDC discussion. For regions like Europe, these target pictures are so enormously important because the countries in Europe, they need to work together for these markets to really let them become resilient. Energy, again, electricity, if we don't start to talk about interconnectors between these countries, the grids of the countries simply miss a massive source for resilience. But the discussion about interconnectors can only happen if the various countries have a target picture of their electricity market. Absolutely. This is what needs to be out there. If I may, what also would help, let's say, that people start to discuss is the speed. It obviously is a race in terms of the climate protection, but it is not only a race in terms of the climate protection, it is also very much a race in terms of being economically competitive. If you have other regions, other countries that have, let's say, very cheap energy sources, because they so speedily develop their supply from renewables. These regions, these countries, they will be so competitive that certain other regions have no chance to actually compete anymore. This is what needs to be understood. So Belem COP is, yes, absolutely. It's the conference of the parties because we want to discuss, let's say, how we protect the climate, yeah, and with it, nature and biodiversity. But for governments, it's actually a major strategic discussion how they are able to continue to be competitive, or how they develop a basis for the economies they govern to be competitive compared to others. That needs to come together. And in Belem, I really hope that, let's say, this becomes very clearly visible that governments start to think in this way.
There's clearly a need, as you suggest, for NDCs to be more comprehensive than they have been in the past, and one could argue that they need to encompass. You mentioned competitiveness, but also arguably make reference to both climate and nature and adaptation as an overall framework. Do you see a role, and also there's the question of being accountable for the plans that are put forward. Do you see a greater role for the commitments that countries make in their NDCs to be reflected in their relationship with investors, potentially by in terms of their bond issuance frameworks?
Yeah, well, the bond issues framework, this is also an interesting one. As you know, let's say in Europe, there will be a climate factor that needs to be considered for bond issuance. That's one aspect clearly. So overall, the financing is a big topic. If I may, this financing of the transition that can only work hand in hand. Let's say if private and public really works together. But again, this requires a target picture. Investors, the private part, needs to understand, let's say, where are we heading? What is it that gives a certain form of overall development of certain markets, and how can we invest into this? This will allow to assess whether that's an attractive investment or not. By the way, it also takes away lots of political volatility, because once an economy, a society has understood what a target picture is, then of course governments are going to implement the target picture. They may change it over time. It does not need to be a rigid target picture, but the target picture is something that society, let's say at large, can start to own. And with this, of course, play a completely different form of the, let's say, discussion partner, counterpart in capital markets. It's very important that this needs to come in. As I mentioned earlier, political risk is certainly political risk, and we always have risk return. So if there is more political risk, return needs to be higher. That means for some people who want to finance something, it's higher cost.
Sure. Understood. Now, we've talked about kind of government commitments, but there's also a role for financial institutions and corporates to make their positions and their commitments clearly expressed on climate change and nature loss. And Allianz has perhaps been a leader in amongst financial institutions in that regard. But I'd be interested in your view on what have been the constraints on the ability of an organisation such as Allianz to make progress, and how you're able to overcome these constraints?
Well, look, there is the first thing that is needed. This is he said to put forward overall and plan with certain targets. That starts to allow to measure, and let's say with the measuring, let's say this allows against a target, so meaningful measuring, and this allows then you also to discuss what are concrete actions that are required. That's, I would say, almost the biggest step, because the moment you start to have a plan with certain form of action, you start to align behind this and really discuss how the implementation can work. You have a chance to discuss trade-offs in terms of cost and speed. You can also start to discuss what is the impact on business. So how is our business actually going to change? But it all comes with, let's say, this form of overall plan and the alignment behind this plan. I would say it is not that there are so massive constraints overall. The moment you have the plan and you communicate it, let's say, openly, and you start to be very honest that there are certain implications with the implementation of that plan. You clearly have then what we call as investors, but also as an insurer, engagement with your partners and clients. You start to talk with the people. Okay, what's the transformation that the clients, the partners are doing? How does this fit with our let's say overall transformation, and how can we cooperate to support that transformation? It's actually very sound for our partners and clients to have it that way. And there is, of course, also tough discussions that some parts need to be transformed. Yes, of course, this needs to be there. But I do not have the perception that there are major constraints and we have difficulties to overcome them. Yeah? We have to face certain realities clearly and to work on it.
It's clear, as you suggest, that partners, customers, suppliers need to understand where you're going and to have a clear and detailed understanding. But is there an extent to which, whether for Allianz or for organisations more broadly in the finance sector, is there an extent to which they have been quieter, less certain, less detailed in their planning for fear of greenwashing?
Yeah, no, look, I mean, greenwashing, the point there is simply there's misinformation. No? Somebody believes that something can be achieved, but it cannot be achieved. And it's already known at the moment where somebody communicates. That's greenwashing, isn't it? And I mean, this is always problematic, right? If you state that you are going to achieve something where you already at the moment of stating it know that you can't achieve it, that's certainly problematic. It's not only in the area of green, it's, let's say, in any area an issue, quite clearly. That aside, the discussion about integrating sustainability and therefore get a much more holistic picture about your business development, not only the financial side, but actually the whole sustainability side included. That, as I mentioned before, is a very solid step. And on that, let's say once you do this, you have it integrated, you know what is, let's say, the financial needs. Sometimes you really need to make investments quite clearly to transform. You can communicate how this actually works, and you can also credibly explain what the measures are that you are going to take to implement it. Is this then completely without any volatility, without any risk? No, it's not. I mean, of course, you can, let's say, later on face the reality that some of what you have planned is not so easy to achieve. But this has nothing to do with greenwashing. It's a proper planning and a proper communication what you, let's say, strive to simply create, produce there.
Now, you gave a number of examples of the pace of change when it comes to the renewables transition. There's a lot of kind of good stories to be told. But I noticed in your recent report on addressing nature loss that there was an identification of the need also for rapid change and quite radical change in terms of business models evolving, but also in terms of the amount of funding required to support nature conservation. Do you have are you similarly positive about the changes that you're seeing right now?
No, well, in terms of the, let's say, the economic transformation driven by, let's say, the energy, the shift to renewable energy, unfortunately, for nature and biodiversity, I cannot give, let's say, similar examples, or I can also not tell such a story. We are very, very much on to how we can really make sure that nature preservation, let's say, very much in focus. We really, really, let's say, have a decision making that considers that. But one of the big topics that we continue to have is, while energy transformation has a very strong business case, the protection of nature, and that's, I know, it's not something people would like to hear, but in the form of how we consider economies, economic activity, the protection of nature has at the moment no strong business case. This is a problem. It's a huge problem that we have. We need to actually come together to see how we can do the protection of nature. To put it very, very bluntly, we seem to be in the situation that dead fish is more expensive than living fish. This seems to be the situation. We trade it, we bring it somewhere to a market, and then dead fish has a price. Living fish, yeah, it's unfortunate, but it doesn't. And in particular, protecting does not have that. And there, we really need to come together how we can work to ensure this, because it is simply that the nature destruction and the biodiversity loss currently happens at a much bigger speed than, let's say, the climate impact that we see. And we need to actually figure out how we can, let's say, as the ones who are doing economic decision making, make these decisions such that nature is protected. This is enormously important. And there are things like reporting. So reporting about the impact on nature is of the essence. It's really of the essence. And starting from there, then really discussions about how we can transform is also of the essence. Protection of nature would have immediately a price if people, for instance, would be willing to pay, let's say, an uptick in products that offer the protection of nature, yeah, that are using raw materials such that, let's say, nature is not, let's say, impacted in a certain form. Immediately, we would have a price for it if people would be willing to pay for products that are coming from a circular economy. Yes, of course, that would help a lot. So what we need to do in this area is we need to honestly talk about what are the facts. Then we need to ensure integrity in these discussions. And from there, we need to be willing to not only discuss, but to inform, to talk that a certain form of economic activity, a large parts of economic activity currently have a massive impact on nature, and that's not sustainable. That's what we need to do. Yeah, and if I may end with this, I would be very, very happy to learn from many, many experts, and we try really to do so here at Allianz, what we can do. But I would love to really see a form of a business case that one can make, and I mean this really in the form of protecting what we have, yeah, because the market would then decide much easier for the protection the moment there is this case. Yeah.
If if rather biodiversity credits can learn the lessons from the carbon credit market, do you think that has a role in putting a price and encouraging investment into nature preservation?
Yeah, but yes, for sure. But let's say carbon credits come, of course, into the market because certain economic activity is forced to face the price of emissions. And the carbon credits simply help them to manage this price of emissions.
Mm-hmm.
So what we would need to consider is, what's the price of destroying nature?
Mm-hmm.
as we consider the price of damaging the atmosphere. Yeah, that's what we need to start to discuss. Of course, we need to. If we don't, if destroying nature has no price, of course, some economic activity will just go on with this destruction. So yes, I agree. There is learnings. There is clearly learnings. Rapidly, we need to figure out what can be done in this respect.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. Now, Günther, just one final question, if I may, which is around your role in the Net Zero Asset Owners Alliance, which I know you're no longer an active part, but you chair of the organisation for a number of years, and it continues to thrive. Meanwhile, finance sector alliances focused on net zero have had probably more challenges. Some are reinventing themselves and having a pause in their operations. Others have disbanded. And what does this say, do you think, on the nature of collaboration on net zero, on pursuing and supporting the net zero transition across the finance sector?
Yeah, look, the Net Zero Asset Owner Alliance, let's say this is a group of experts who are working on the technical capabilities to manage investment portfolios, considering let's say the climate effects and impact. So, how do you actually manage a portfolio that emission levels go down? And the technical means are developed by this large set of experts. Let's say they are structured in various expert groups, and they have been working on, let's say, what is, let's say, a meaningful emission target for certain asset classes. If you have the target, what is a meaningful set of measures to really manage these emission levels, all against the fact that these investors have fiduciary duties, have performance targets, are managing money, let's say, for many people. This is so the technical capabilities such that, let's say, emission levels, climate impact are integrated with the financial steering of investment portfolios. These technical capabilities, they are, or they were developed, have been developed by, let's say, expert groups in the Net Zero Asset Owner Alliance. Most of these technical capabilities are out there and they are publicly available. Let's say the Net Zero Asset Owner Alliance is not sitting on it and is not giving it to other investors. No, other investors can also use it. So even if people have decided that their institution, their company is no longer with the Net Zero Asset Owner Alliance, and there are a few, they can continue to, of course, use these technical means, the approaches, and let's say enhance their own decision making so that they can indeed steer the portfolio such that financial means and let's say climate impact, climate mitigation measures are integrated. That's what is there. And as I say, most of this is fully developed, fully available. And it's important to mention that, let's say, equipped with these technical capabilities, investors can then for themselves decide what are target levels, what are measures, and what are overall transformation plans. That's what they do individually. Individually, they do this. Yeah? This is very important to not confuse this. So while they work together on the technical means, let's say the whole target setting, the whole transformation plan, the whole set of measures, and with this, obviously, their entire portfolio steering is done individually. That's what they do individually and what they can do individually. And many do, as I said, they are not necessarily members of the Net Zero Asset Alliance. This is what needs to be understood. Most of the work is done, and we are quite happy with this. Now, what's happening with other alliances? Well, I ask you, please talk to these other people who are, let's say, working there, how they want to evolve, develop, and what they do. And also, you can, of course, discuss with them, let's say, where they are in terms of providing the technical means for steering what they propose to steer. That's what should be done with those colleagues and experts. And I would assume that they are also very far developed already.
Okay. That's very clear. I appreciate your long and thoughtful answer on that one. Well, that wraps things up, and the only thing that remains is for me to say thank you very much for your time, thoughts, and insights. Thank you very much, Gunther.
No, thank you. Indeed, really, thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk to you. Thank you.